Hello everyone, Mark the Man Gamer here. Welcome to the first part of my new Halo series where we take a deep dive into the history of the major characters of the Halo universe, and to start things off we look into the man himself, the Master Chief. Now this should go without saying, but there is major spoiler warning here. If you have not played the games, not read the books, this is going to give away pretty much everything from Master Chief's point of view. So if you don't want to get spoiled for anything, go ahead and click out of this video now. This is your one and only chance. Alright, by now everybody who should have has probably clicked out of the video, so let's go ahead and hop into the Master Chief's history. Born on Eridanus 2 in 2511, John-117 had a pretty normal childhood for 6 years. He was raised by two parents in Elysium City, attended a public school, and had plenty of friends. We even get a short physical description: brown hair, freckles, and a small gap between his front teeth. Other than being a whole head taller than most kids his age, he seemed just like any other child physically. However, his above-average strength and intelligence made him a target for Dr. Halsey's candidate list for the Spartan 2 program. After Dr. Halsey and then Lieutenant Jacob Keyes went to observe him in 2517 and he passed Halsey's quote-unquote luck test, his fate was sealed and he was conscripted into the Spartan 2 program. Later in 2517, John and the rest of the conscripted children were abducted from their homes, replaced with cheap Flash clones, and transported to the planet Reach to begin their training. For the next 8 years, the children trained under Chief Petty Officer Franklin Mendez in military strategy and fitness, and were taught mathematics, linguistics, and history from the AI Deja, who worked closely with Dr. Halsey on the children's progress. John quickly became a team leader after a training mission in 2519, where the children were all dropped in different locations in a forest and were instructed to find their way back to a Pelican dropship, and were also told that the last one to return would be left behind to walk back to the compound. After the children all found each other, they found the dropship guarded by ununiformed men who tried to attack them. The children managed to knock out the guards and all went back on the dropship. Instead of a punishment like John was expecting, Dr. Halsey recommended that he be made a team leader. Thus began his role as leader of Blue Team, consisting of John, Kelly, Linda, and Fred. Later on, the members of Blue Team would change or rotate, including some Spartan 3s later on, and currently, as of Halo 5, consists of Kelly, Linda, and Fred. In 2525, John and the rest of the Spartan 2s underwent the most brutal part of their training yet, the physical augmentation process. It killed 30 and physically disabled 12 of the other Spartan trainees. John was one of the 33 Spartans who survived the process unscathed, while the rest, who could still operate, were moved to positions in the Office of Naval Intelligence. For the ones that survived, the augmentations made them look as if they were Olympic athletes and increased their reflexes and mental capabilities. After the augmentations, the Spartan 2s went on their first official mission against the insurrectionists in the asteroid belt in the Eridanus system. The Spartans captured the rebel front leader, Colonel Robert Watts. The mission was a success, even with John being injured, shot in the side. His augmented body healed quickly and he received a Purple Heart. The same year, the Spartans were briefed on the massacre that had taken place on Harvest during the UNSC's first contact with the Covenant. Directly after, the Spartans traveled to Chi-Seti on the UNSC Commonwealth and received their Mjolnir Mark IV power armor. When a Covenant vessel attacked the Commonwealth, Blue Team engaged the vessel from a Pelican dropship. They used their suit's thrusters to maneuver through a hole the Commonwealth's MAC gun had put through the Covenant ship's hull. John, Kelly, and Samuel made it onto the ship and planted Havoc nukes to destroy the ship. Samuel's Mjolnir suit, however, was breached. Unable to leave the ship, he stayed to activate the nukes manually and was KIA. For the next 27 years, John fought battle after battle against the Covenant. Two of the notable battles include, firstly, the Covenant attack on the Corbulo Academy of Military Science on Circinius IV in 2526, where John first meets Thomas Lasky, future commander of the UNSC Infinity, who was a cadet at the Academy at the time, and the second battle, the raid on the Covenant's Third Fleet of Glorious Consequence, where Spartans were sent to rescue Dr. Halsey, who had been captured by Covenant forces. The rescue was successful, but at the cost of the life of Solomon 069. The next big event for John was the fall of Reach. The fight, though brief, was of great significance for John. Here, he received the Mjolnir Mark V powered assault armor, which improved his strength and reaction time more effectively than his older Mark IV suit. He was also introduced to and partnered with the AI Cortana, who would become a close friend and ally to him. In the first test of their partnership, the two were put through a practically suicidal test in an attempt by Colonel Ackerson to get rid of John. John refused to cheat the test and was determined to win by Ackerson's rules. Despite nearly being killed, Cortana and John's teamwork had them pass the test in an early show of the incredible partnership the two could come to develop. After Reach came under attack by a massive Covenant armada, the majority of the Spartans were sent to the planet's surface to protect the orbital defense generators, which powered the planet's 20 orbital defense platforms. John, with Linda and James 005, were sent to Reach Station Gamma to destroy an unsecured nav database on board the UNSC Circumference. If the Covenant obtained the database, they would discover the location of every human world, including Earth, which was still a closely guarded secret at the time. The nav database was destroyed, but Linda and James were ambushed by Covenant Sangheili. James was lost in space, and Linda was critically wounded. John saved 4 other Marines on the station, including Staff Sergeant Avery Johnson. They returned to the UNSC Pillar of Autumn and were placed in cryosleep as the ship landed on, then fled Reach, and following the Cole Protocol, jumped into slip space with coordinates deduced by Cortana from constellation data retrieved earlier, in hopes of leading the Covenant away from Earth. Once the ship had arrived safely at Installation 04, the crew realized they had been followed through space by around a dozen Covenant ships, who ultimately engaged the Autumn and sent several boarding parties to board the ship. Captain Jacob Keyes ordered John to be woken from cryosleep and tasked him with securing the escape of Cortana while he crash-landed the Pillar of Autumn on the ring. John escaped the Pillar of Autumn on a life pod and rallied Marines to fight against Covenant forces stationed on the ring. Cortana found out that Captain Keyes had been captured and was held prisoner on the vessel Truth and Reconciliation. John joined the strike team that was sent to rescue Captain Keyes, where he learned that Halo was a super weapon. The captain gave John new orders to locate the map room that pinpointed the location of Halo's control center. When John was finished, he was dropped off in the first of 3 snowy chasms leading towards the control room. During the long trek, he encountered Fireteam Zulu, and they assisted him in securing the first and second chasms. Initially, fighting on Halo was between the UNSC and Covenant forces, but after Covenant forces had unwittingly released an ancient parasite, the majority of both forces were infected and the fighting shifted to combating a new enemy. John was sent out by Installation 04's monitor, 343 Guilty Spark, to retrieve the Index, an activation device for the Halo ring that John is led to believe would destroy all fled forms within a large radius. Upon John's return to Halo's control room, Cortana revealed that Halo's true purpose is to destroy all sentient lifeforms in the galaxy to starve the Flood, not to kill the Flood themselves. John was then forced to disrupt Halo's firing system by disabling Halo's phase pulse generator in order to delay the monitor's plan. John soon joined the 3-sided combat amongst the Covenant, the Flood, and the Forerunner Sentinels. Soon after, he tried to rescue Captain Keyes, but was too late. Captain Keyes had been infected and transformed into a proto-Gravemind Flood form. After infiltrating the Truth and Reconciliation, John managed to retrieve the Captain's neural implants, which he used to activate the Pillar of Autumn self-destruct sequence. John and Cortana barely made it back to the Autumn with a Banshee, only to discover that the ship was crawling with both Flood and Covenant alike. After the self-destruct sequence was aborted by 343 Guilty Spark, John proceeded to manually overload the fusion reactors, which would subsequently destroy both the Pillar of Autumn and Installation 04. After successfully destroying the fusion reactors on the Pillar of Autumn, John used a Warthog to reach the extraction point where Pelican Echo 419 would pick him up. John reached the extraction point only to witness the Pelican crashing into the Autumn's hull after being shot down by a pair of Banshees. John quickly diverted his escape route towards the ship's hangar bay, which housed a longsword fighter. Only a handful of UNSC forces survived, including Lieutenant Elias Haverson, Corporal Locklear, Warrant Officer Sheila Pulaski, then Staff Sergeant Avery Johnson, Private First Class Chips Dubbo, and then Staff Sergeant Marcus Stacker. After the destruction of Installation 04, Cortana and John fled through space in the longsword they had escaped in. He discovered 3 cryotubes floating nearby, one containing Linda, and retrieved them. Soon after, the Covenant's flagship, Ascendant Justice, came into the system along with a few cruisers, some of which had possibly escaped Halo's destruction and called the flagship to Threshold. A nearby Pelican dropship, which had docked on an asteroid floating among Halo's debris field, fired at the cruiser to distract it. After a successful escape from the Covenant battle group, John linked the 2 vessels and brought its passengers aboard the longsword. The crew of the Pelican then helped John in capturing the Ascendant Justice. The human survivors then traveled to Reach looking for surviving Spartans. John eventually located some of his fellow Spartan 2s on Reach, along with Vice Admiral Danforth Whitcomb and Dr. Catherine Halsey. They returned to the ship and linked it with the UNSC frigate Gettysburg. They began to travel toward Earth and soon discovered a base belonging to the Eridanus rebels, led by Governor Jacob Giles. After receiving some repairs, Dr. Halsey leaves with Kelly to an unknown location aboard Governor Giles' personal ship, at the time docked with the UNSC Gettysburg and the Ascendant Justice. The remaining UNSC forces were forced to abandon the rebels in the face of a Covenant assault and made their way toward the Covenant refit and repair station Unyielding Hierophant, where an enormous fleet was poised to invade Earth. Just before the slipspace jump, Corporal Locklear inadvertently commits suicide while distorting the Forerunner crystal recovered by Dr. Halsey from underneath the ruins of Castle Base. Halsey gave it to the Corporal shortly before her departure, intending him to destroy it rather than let it fall into the hands of the Covenant. John faced a dilemma regarding the combat data on the Flood which Dr. Halsey had given him. Providing the standard data set to Lieutenant Haverson would protect Sergeant Johnson from possible experimentation by Oni. However, providing him the complete data which contained reference to Sergeant Johnson's escape from the Flood due to his Boren syndrome would result in Johnson's death. John and the few remaining Spartan 2s, Linda, Grace, William, and Fred, focused on finding a way to stop the Covenant from reaching Earth, the location of which had been discovered. They decided to destroy the unyielding Hierophant. The Spartan 2s infiltrated the station. After spending 11 hours on board, they arrived at a temple where a copy of Cortana warned them of the brute guards stationed at the temple. Linda took a sniping position, and the other 4 Spartans entered the temple. They were ambushed by brutes and John was nearly killed, but the team managed to kill their attackers. Grace, however, was killed. John activated the failsafe on her armor, denying her compromise by the Covenant. The team sabotaged the generators of the unyielding Hierophant. As they escaped through a side door, the failsafe on Grace's armor activated, disintegrating a Covenant lance. John, Fred, and Will were quickly spotted by 3 Banshees, but their Sangheili pilots were killed by Linda's sniper fire. The Banshees were then captured by the Spartans. John doubled back to retrieve Linda, who killed 4 more Banshee pilots who were attempting to kill John. They then escaped by destroying a glass atrium and arrived back at the UNSC Gettysburg. Vice Admiral Whitcomb and Lieutenant Haverson piloted the Ascendant Justice straight toward the unyielding Hierophant. Whitcomb discussed the battles of the Alamo and Thermopylae with John, then prepared to fight the Covenant off while the unyielding Hierophant's fusion reactor detonated. Each of the 500 Covenant ships maneuvered next to the Ascendant Justice. The Admiral and the Lieutenant were killed when the fusion reactor exploded, annihilating 486 ships of the Covenant fleet, leaving only around a dozen intact. These ships later joined the Prophet of Truth's rebuilt fleet in the attack on Earth. John left after witnessing Whitcomb's and Haverson's sacrifice and arrived at Earth with the last members of his team, Linda, Will, and Fred, as well as Sergeant Johnson and Cortana. Aboard Cairo Station, John received the Mjolnir Mark VI powered assault armor and attended an awards ceremony with the newly promoted Lieutenant Commander Miranda Keyes and Sergeant Major Avery Johnson. The ceremony was interrupted by the arrival of the Fleet of Sacred Consecration, initiating the Battle of Earth. John successfully repulsed Covenant boarders from the station. Upon discovering a Covenant antimatter charge on board Cairo Station, John fought his way through waves of Covenant forces until he reached the bomb and allowed Cortana to access and deactivate it by transferring her back to his suit. Afterwards, she chose to rejoin him despite his offer for her to remain on the station. He used the charge against the Covenant by launching himself and the device via decompression of one of the station's launch bays toward an assault carrier. A timely strike by a longsword interceptor opened a breach in the warship's hull, allowing John to direct the bomb back into the ship's fusion core. He then proceeded to use the blast from that bomb to launch himself back into the UNSC in amber clad. John was then deployed to New Mombasa, East African Protectorate, aboard the UNSC in amber clad. In an attempt to board Solemn Penance, both of the strike team's Pelican's dropships were shot down by a Scarab. John and the surviving Marines on his team fought their way to the other Pelican's crash site. After rendezvousing with Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Stacker at Hotel Zanzibar in Old Mombasa, John destroyed Covenant units along the shore of the city as he chased the Scarab. Upon arriving at the edge of Old Mombasa, John received a Scorpion tank from Sergeant Major Johnson. After fighting through numerous highway tunnels and suburbs, John reached the city center, where Marines under the command of Staff Sergeant Marcus Banks were pinned down by Covenant forces. With the assistance of the Marines and a large stockpile of weapons, John boarded the Scarab and was able to destroy it, and the Covenant forces protecting it. John was then transported to an amber clad to intercept the Prophet of Regret's flagship. When the flagship started to enter slipspace, Lieutenant Commander Keyes was granted permission to follow it. John and all on board in amber clad were brought to Installation 05. Forced to act quickly once at Installation 05, John deployed groundside in an SOEIV along with several orbital drop shock troopers. This team was tasked with locating and assassinating the Prophet of Regret. Cortana informed John of Regret's intent to fire Halo as soon as possible. He tracked the Prophet of Regret to a temple in the middle of a lake, but not before witnessing hundreds of Covenant vessels coming out of slipspace, followed by High Charity. He quickly dispatched the Prophet of Regret and escaped the temple shortly before it was destroyed by an overhead cruiser. John jumped off the edge of the structure and into the lake below. Losing consciousness and being unable to swim in the lake, he was captured by the Flood's Central Intelligence, the Gravemind. Shortly thereafter, Thel Vadam, the Arbiter, was also captured. The Gravemind appealed to the common interest that the Flood and humans shared, preventing the Halos from being fired. John agreed to help, so the Gravemind tasked both captives with locating the index and sent them to the 2 most likely locations. John was sent to High Charity, interrupting a sermon by the Prophet of Truth. The conflict between the elites and brutes was just beginning, leading the Covenant on the path to civil war with John caught right in the middle. After saving imprisoned Marines, John chased the surviving hierarchs through High Charity. About that time, the now flood-infested In-Amber-clad made a slipspace jump into the city and eventually crashed into a building. The flood used Pelican dropships from the In-Amber-clad to spread the parasite throughout High Charity. Despite the flood, Chief eventually caught up to the prophets and their brute escorts. However, only the dying prophet of mercy who had become a flood infection for him was left to tell him that truth was heading to Earth. John faced another crucial dilemma. The Covenant had the Index and could activate Halo. However, Earth's defenses stood little chance of withstanding Truth's reassembled fleet. Ultimately, John followed the latter priority, and not wanting to risk detonating them remotely, was forced to leave Cortana behind so that if Halo were activated, she could detonate in Amberclad's reactors. John boarded the Forerunner Dreadnought, which was bound for Earth, but not before promising to return for Cortana after he stopped Truth. After a series of firefights, captures, and escapes, John exited the Dreadnought and crash-landed on Earth within an East African jungle where he was found by Sergeant Johnson, the Arbiter, and the rest of their squad. Johnson believed John to be dead and requested heavy lifting gear in order to recover the Spartan's body. However, John awoke in battle-ready condition only moments later, showing his incredible tolerance to pain and shock. He attempted to attack the Arbiter, believing that the elites were still the enemy. Johnson informed him that the Arbiter was an ally and that the disillusioned elite had defected from the Covenant. John and the Marines traveled through the jungle, searching for evacuation to a nearby military base. Johnson and his team split up from John and the Arbiter. The Sergeant and his squad were soon captured by Loyalist Covenant brutes, although they were rescued by John and the Arbiter. After taking heavy fire from Phantoms, a Pelican dropship evacuated the team to a UNSC base known as Crow's Nest. The base soon came under attack, but not before Fleet Admiral Terrence Hood told John of his plan. Lieutenant Commander Keyes decided to evacuate all forces, many of whom were injured. John, the Arbiter, and the remaining UNSC Marines defended the base during its evacuation, planting a massive bomb to destroy the base along with the invading Covenant forces. John fought his way through many brutes, escaping the explosion in an elevator. He met up with several Marine survivors underground, and they escaped the base and headed for the city of Voy along Savo Highway, crushing Covenant resistance along their way. At the Battle of Voy, John pushed through many Loyalist forces as he made his way to what was believed to be the Ark. Rather, this turned out to be a device that opened up a portal to the Ark. With the Marine support, John destroyed 3 anti-air Wraiths, a Scarab, and a Covenant Type 27 anti-aircraft cannon, allowing Lord Hood's remaining frigates, the UNSC Forward Unto Dawn, Aegis Fate, and another frigate to fire upon Truth's Dreadnought, though to little effect. Truth then activated and fled through the portal with his remaining Loyalist forces, while the UNSC remained behind to determine their next move. Just as the battle seemed finished, the flood-infested Covenant cruiser Indulgence of Conviction crash-landed in Voy. John, the Arbiter, and the remaining Marines fought to contain the flood infection, learning that the only way to contain the flood was to destroy the warship. During the battle, the CAS-class Shadow of Intent and its Sangheili fleet, led by Shipmaster Artas Vadum, came to the aid of the UNSC. He deployed a Special Operations Strike Team through orbital insertion pods, assisting John as he was sent to retrieve Cortana from the cruiser, as it was believed that she was on board. Aided by 343 Guilty Spark, John retrieved a damaged data device and was brought aboard Vadum's flagship, Shadow of Intent. This data turned out only to be a message rather than Cortana herself. The Sangheili were able to stop the flood infestation by glassing the city and its surroundings, much to Lord Hood's displeasure. The Sangheili and the UNSC watched Cortana's recording, which contained a warning that High Charity, now overwhelmed and controlled by the Gravemind, was heading for Earth. However, she offered hope with information of a way to stop the Halos from firing and neutralize the flood threat. Convinced of the reliability of Cortana's message, John resolved to journey to the Ark, while Hood mobilized remaining UNSC forces on Earth. John accompanied a joint UNSC Sangheili task force through the portal aboard the UNSC Forward Unto Dawn to the Ark. The Sangheili carried UNSC forces through the space portal which led to the Ark. The team was determined to stop Truth from activating the remaining 6 Halos. They descended in Pelicans while the Shipmaster's fleet fought hard against the Brute's ships. They flew to the surface of the Ark to eliminate the Covenant in the area, to secure a landing zone for UNSC Forward Unto Dawn, and to find the Ark's cartographer. Traveling in Scorpions, Warthogs, and captured Prowlers, John and other Marines located the cartographer and learned that Truth was an installation citadel. John then escaped from the cartographer and proceeded to assault the fortress. John, the Arbiter, and a squad of UNSC Marines were assigned to separately attack 3 barrier towers, which were emitting a protective shield around the citadel. Although John and Arbiter managed to deactivate 2 towers, Sergeant Johnson was captured in the battle, being spared to serve as a reclaimer. John, Arbiter, and the Sangheili deactivated the last tower, lowering the shield. Just as the Shadow of Intent was about to destroy the citadel, the flood-controlled High Charity exited slipspace, bringing the Flood into the battle and disabling the Shadow of Intent with a Flood biomass boulder. After defeating the last remnants of the Loyalist forces around the Citadel, including 2 Scarabs, John and the Arbiter entered the Citadel. Although Miranda Keyes had forced her way in, breaking through the central window with her Pelican, she was soon surrounded. As she hesitated to kill Johnson then herself, Truth shot and killed Keyes with a spiker. Truth then forced Johnson to begin the activation sequence. In an unexpected turn of events, John and the Arbiter made a temporary alliance with the Flood to stop the activation of the Halos. The final Loyalist defenses were crushed by the Flood as John and the Arbiter reached Truth, who was already being infected by the Flood. The Arbiter then executed him with his energy sword while John deactivated the rings. The Gravemind then betrayed John and the Arbiter, laughing as it had succeeded in preventing its own destruction. After fighting past waves of Flood, the two escaped. As they were leaving the Citadel, John saw a vision of Cortana that led him and the Arbiter to the exit. There he learned her plan. A replacement for Installation 04 had been built by the Ark and was not yet connected with the rest of the array. Since the Halo was so far from the inhabited galaxy, John decided to activate the ring and destroy the Gravemind, but first headed to the remains of High Charity. On High Charity, John battled his way through hordes of Flood, being taunted with images of Cortana falling into rampancy and by threats from the Gravemind. He finally reached Cortana, who still had the activation index from the first Installation 04. Then John destroyed the city by overloading its backup generators. On his way out, Cortana detected a friendly contact, which turned out to be the Arbiter. High Charity exploded as the two narrowly escaped on a Pelican. After the Sangheili's victory over the Covenant Loyalists, the Shadow of Intent, along with the UNSC forces, left the Ark for Earth, leaving the Chief, Cortana, the Arbiter, and Johnson to finish the fight. The final task for John, Arbiter, and Cortana was to destroy the Flood by activating Installation 08. The three landed on the Halo, finding that the Gravemind was trying to rebuild itself on the installation. Flood Dispersal Pods released combat forms against John and the Arbiter, forcing them to fight their way to the control room where the ring could be activated. During the battle, Sergeant Johnson arrived to assist John in the battle. After defeating all Flood forces around the control room, 343 Guilty Spark unlocked the door to the control room. Once inside, however, Guilty Spark realized that the team intended to fire the Halo before it could be completed, which would destroy the ring. After mortally wounding Sergeant Johnson, he then turned on John. John stood his ground even after being hit by several energy blasts and fought against Guilty Spark. Although the monitor seemed to be invulnerable, Johnson shot the monitor, temporarily distracting him. He then handed John his Spartan laser, and John destroyed Guilty Spark. Johnson's injury was fatal, and he requested that John, quote, send him out with a bang. After handing over Cortana's data chip and imploring him, don't ever let her go. Cortana then activated Installation 08, and the Arbiter and John fled to the Forward Unto Dawn on board a Warthog, fighting the Flood and local sentinels along the way. The team boarded the Dawn and escaped the firing and destruction of Installation 08. However, the slipspace portal which was open for them could not sustain itself under the stress, and the closure severed the ship in half, sending the Arbiter to Earth, and John and Cortana were left drifting in space towards Requiem. John and Cortana were presumed dead when they did not make it back to Earth. The forward half of the Forward Unto Dawn, bearing the Arbiter, crash-landed on Earth. Lord Hood commissioned a memorial near Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa in honor of UNSC servicemen lost during the war. As there were no pictures to remember him by, John's Spartan ID number, 117, was carved into the memorial by an unknown party, and the UNSC Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy insignia patch was taped beside his ID number. Ironically, he and a few other Spartans were the only ones truly missing in action. John and Cortana managed to survive the explosion of Installation 08 in the remaining cargo portion of the Forward Unto Dawn, but it was nearly powerless and without airlocks or a bridge could not be properly navigated. Cortana, relieved that John had survived, explained this to John, and that it could take years before anyone could discover their distress signal. In a similar conversation to one at the end of Halo Combat Evolved, Cortana listed what John did and told him, "It's finished." And this time, John agreed with her. John placed himself in a cryotube, at which point Cortana said, "I'll miss you." John replied with, "Wake me when you need me," and went into cryosleep. In 2556, while still stranded in space, Cortana attempted to talk to John while he was still asleep. Unable to get a response from him, she recounted the history of the galaxy, seemingly unaware that John could not hear her and showing major signs that she was descending into rampancy. 4 years, 7 months, and 10 days later in 2557, Forward Unto Dawn arrives at the Forerunner's shield world named Requiem. Cortana wakes John from cryosleep when they are scanned by Requiem. Shortly after, the Dawn is boarded by new Covenant forces seeking to deny them access to the shield world. After shooting down a Covenant cruiser, Requiem opens and draws both the Dawn and the Covenant fleet into the shield world. John miraculously survives the impact and lands on Requiem, where Cortana reveals that she is descending into rampancy. John's undying loyalty to Cortana leads him to promising Cortana he'll get her back to Earth and getting Dr. Halsey to fix her. However, Cortana states she cannot recover from rampancy. John presses on and navigates the wreckage. While doing so, finds the transmission of the UNSC Infinity, although faint. Cortana tells John they need to hijack a Covenant ship, and as they close in on the Forerunner facility, the Infinity signal clears up enough to hear a word. In the Forerunner facility, the two of them find a localized cartographer, revealing to them that they are on Requiem. When John asks Cortana to find out what the Julian-Dama's Covenant are searching for, the console is locked up by an unknown source. They reactivate the cartographer, and after doing so, the transmission from the Infinity is picked up again, much clearer than before. Cortana attempts to contact the Infinity, however to no avail. She then suggests for John to use the cartographer to find the Infinity's location. The cartographer refuses initially, although soon points John to Requiem's core, which he doubts is an accurate estimation of the ship's whereabouts. Cortana states that the planet is hollow and that somebody could have gotten deeper into Requiem than them. Afterwards, she suggests to take a portal to the core from a terminus on the far side of the complex. John fights his way to the terminus, which is situated atop a tower. Upon reaching it, Cortana attempts to open a portal to the point of the Infinity's transmission location. When she tries to do so, the system responds with the Forerunner symbol for Reclaimer. She tries again. However, when the portal opens, a large number of Promethean knights spawn around them but hesitate to engage in combat. John then jumps into the portal, evading the AIs. They exit the portal somewhere near the core, close to a console. The satellite in the center of the core is amplifying the Infinity's transmission, but two beams coming from it are interfering with the satellite. Cortana then opens another portal to an area near the first pylon where John encounters the Prometheans. He fights through them and takes down the pylon, which clears up the signal even more. Upon returning to the console, several of Julian-Dama's Covenant ships exit slipspace at the core and start heading toward the second pylon. John then portals near to this point, fighting his way to and disabling it, making the transmission clean. John is then contacted by the Infinity's captain, who picks up John's IFF tag. Cortana attempts to warn the Infinity not to enter Requiem, but the signal received by Captain Del Rio is faint, thus the ship is ordered to move faster, endangering their crew greatly. John is advised to head to the satellite quickly by his companion, and when doing so finds the Covenant and Prometheans in a firefight. He makes his way through them, and upon reaching the satellite, Cortana tells John to touch two pillars with the Reclaimer symbols on them. In order to contact the Infinity to warn its captain, the Spartan does so. Instead of being a satellite, the machine is revealed to actually be the Didact's cryptum, with him needing a Reclaimer to be released. The Didact is then let out from his spherical cell after 100,000 years of imprisonment. Stating that humans were not fit to uphold the mantle, he calls the librarian meddlesome in attempting to protect humans, and by simply waving his hand regains control of all the Prometheans, turning their hard lights orange instead of blue. He dismisses John and Cortana by throwing the Master Chief into a faraway wall, rendering him less of a threat as he tries to recover from the impact. John then tries to avoid the Didact's jump into slipspace, but is left unconscious when the Didact leaves the core, destabilizing it in the process. John awakens and escapes the planet's core by ghost, using it to jump back to the surface just in time to watch the Infinity crash, the Didact following to scan it. Following the Didact, John fights his way through countless Prometheans in a jungle on Requiem, eventually encountering Commander Lasky and Commander Palmer, as well as several Spartan 4s and Marines. Fighting alongside the Marines through more Prometheans, John eventually discovers several knights commanding Covenant forces. After extracting via Pelican, John joins forces with his successors and they fight their way to the Infinity in a Scorpion, where Captain Del Rio orders him to take a Mantis and deal with the Didact's cryptum outside the ship. Fighting his way through dozens of Prometheans and Covenant soldiers, John makes it to the outer hull of the ship where, after fighting off several waves of Banshees and Phantoms, he activated one of the Infinity's Max where it and the rest of the ship's defensives repelled the cryptum. After meeting up with Del Rio, John and Cortana tried to convince the captain of how much a threat the Didact really is, only for their efforts to be in vain, as Del Rio was more concerned with having the Infinity escape and report back to FleetCom. When John attempted to make it a point about the Didact's vulnerability, Del Rio retorted with a veiled insult about John being the final Spartan 2 before the bridge. John was later deployed along with Gypsy Company to destroy the gravity well keeping Infinity inside the planet. Hitching a ride with a mammoth, he worked his way down a canyon-like landscape using a target locator to destroy a particle cannon en route. He later entered a Forerunner structure in hopes of disabling a certain restraining piece of technology, but was instead lured into what appeared to be a shaft of blue light after Cortana went missing. He was encountered by the perceived consciousness of the librarian in Requiem's system and told of the Didact's plan. to use a device known as the Composer against humanity after remedial education on the history of the human-Forerunner relations and the Forerunner Flood War. In order to combat the Didact effectively, the librarian advanced his evolutionary process to render him immune to the composing process, soon releasing him to fend off the Didact. John destroyed the gravity well and returned to the Infinity, where he tried to convince Captain Del Rio of the threat the Didact posed. Del Rio refused to believe it, which angered Cortana, having another fit of rampancy surprising the crew. Del Rio ordered Cortana to be decommissioned because of her outbursts, only to have John take her chip away before anyone else could. Del Rio ordered for the chip to be returned, only to be turned down by John. Angered even further, Del Rio ordered for John to be arrested at the hands of Palmer. John gave a final warning of the Didact and left the bridge. Lasky decided to circumvent orders and instead gave John a pelican to help in his efforts to defeat the Didact. John left the Infinity and went to disable 2 towers that were generating a shield around the Didact, later attempting to use a control tower to trap the Didact inside Requiem. When that failed to Cortana's worsening condition, John decided to hitch a ride on one of his escort liches. Leaping from a tower, the Spartan skydived down to one. The Didact's cryptum fused with a Forerunner ship, Mantle's approach, in the planet, and he, along with a few dozen escort liches, went through a slipspace portal leading to Installation 03. After traveling through slipspace portal safely by hiding under a piece of a Covenant lich, John arrived with the Didact and Julian-Dama's Covenant forces at Installation 03. There, the UNSC research facility fell under attack by the forces from Requiem. John managed to enter the Lich, incapacitate the Covenant crew, and take over the bridge, sending a broadcast to the station and warning them of the impending attack, telling them to start an immediate evacuation. In the middle of the message, Cortana's rampancy stopped John's broadcast with another outburst. She ignored his command to stop the Lich from a crash course with the station and continued to ramble, causing the captured vehicle to crash into the station. After waking up in the remains of the crash, John regained communications with the station's head scientist, Dr. Tilson. He recommended for her to evacuate the station. Replying that the Covenant had taken over the landing bays, John told her to at least prepare for evacuation while he secured one. He fought his way through the station, defeating multiple of Julian-Dama's Covenant squads, until eventually had cleared an evacuation point. From there, he made his way to Dr. Tilson to explain the situation of the Didact's yearning for the Composer on the station. As the Composer was too large to move with anything less powerful than the biggest starship in the UNSC, the Spartan asked for Dr. Tilson to give Cortana access to the station's supply manifest in order to search for a means of destroying the Composer. Cortana managed to find a nuclear warhead on the station, and the Master Chief decided that it was the only way the Didact could possibly be stopped from taking the Composer. Telling Tilson this caused her great distress, as she had dedicated herself to researching the Composer for a very long time. However, she still gave the Spartan her word that she would make sure the warheads were primed for a remote detonation. Apologizing, John once again asked for Tilson to begin the evacuation. When Tilson began the evacuation, the first evacuation shuttle was shot down by the Covenant. Cortana realized that she and John would be able to program the station's defenses to provide cover for the evacuation. Fighting his way to the defense console, Cortana's rampant outbursts continued to worsen. While Tilson's team rigged the warhead, Cortana programmed the defenses, succeeding to make them target the Covenant. The Spartan then went to rendezvous with Dr. Tilson, but was hindered by the Composer's location being compromised. Fending enemies off once more, the Chief told Dr. Tilson that ready or not he needed the weapon then. On his next broadcast to her, he received no response, and so headed back to the elevator platform to get to a cargo bay, hoping to find the nuke and Dr. Tilson. An immense energy wave hit the elevator in mid-transport, stopping it. Mantle's approach then pulled the Composer away from Ivanov Station with ease. John tried to focus Cortana on finding Dr. Tilson. Cortana researched Dr. Tilson's career files, stating her full name, Sandra K. Tilson, and that she was a student at Pegassi Institute, where she obtained a doctorate in archaeology. Cortana soon found her on another deck in the station and confirmed her biosignature was stable. The elevator continued on its course, and John exited it to find Tilson and a large crowd of distressed scientists. Telling her that the Didact stole the Composer, he inserted Cortana into the system and asked to check the flight catalog for anything that can carry a payload. Tilson, in confusion, asked the Chief how the Didact moved the Composer, then trembling told him, "Wait, something is happening," as the Didact charged a beam. He asked Cortana to activate the station's defenses, but they did not respond. Cortana continued to search through the catalog but found nothing. Unable to help, Cortana watched as the Composer composed every member of the science team at once, only knocking John unconscious because of his immunity to the weapon. An unspecified amount of time passed before John awakened and saw Cortana, distraught, sitting at the console. She asked him if he was okay, and crying, said she could hear what was left of the scientist after monitoring the data pulse. The Spartan clearly attempted to avoid emotional conversation and stoically stated that they needed to move. Cortana sadly said that the scientists were gone, to which John dutifully added that more would follow if the Didact reached Earth. Cortana returned to dwell on her ensuing rampancy and how the UNSC would pair John with another AI, possibly another Cortana model if Halsey let them. He told her that he wouldn't let that happen. She ignored his stubborn optimism and desperately informed him the new AI wouldn't be her. Beginning to power up a broadsword in the hangar, the AI let Master Chief know that whatever the librarian did to John worked. John made his way to the hangar, entering the pilot seat of the broadsword, which was being armed with the warhead. He then set off from Ivanov Station in pursuit of the Didact. Cortana stated a plan of boarding the ship and finding the bridge when the Didact began to prepare for another slipspace jump. She warned him that the broadsword's shields were not rated for slipspace, but John replied that the Didacts were, before boosting forward to take refuge inside his enemy's shielding. The Spartan then started to fly along the outer hull of the Didact ship toward the Composer, dodging pieces of the ship as they moved and activated the defenses attempting to destroy him. During this time, the Didact broadcasted a signal expressing his surprise and dismay at how John wasn't composed and that such inoculation should not have been possible. Cortana explained that the Didact was with the Composer and that they could destroy both of them at once. John continued to fly through the outer hull of the ship until Cortana told him they were coming out of slipspace. Communications from Earth warned them of the fleet's detection of the unknown ship. Master Chief then attempted to contact Captain Del Rio on the Infinity. Thomas Lasky, however, picked up John's transmission. John questioned him as to where the captain was, with Lasky replying that FleetCom wasn't happy with Del Rio abandoning the Chief on Requiem, and that he himself would have to do instead. John explained the Didact's intentions and that he and Cortana were in a broadsword carrying a Havoc-grade payload, with the intention of destroying the Composer. Lasky had the orbiting fleet engage the Didact and the Composer. The Spartan managed to fight through the remainder of the outer hull and located the Composer and the Didact. Attempting to gain access to the Composer, Master Chief was cut off from an opening to it. John informed Lasky of this, to which he recommended deactivating the shield so Infinity could make another opening. John proceeded to destroy the shield and weapon generators. With the defenses down, the Infinity moved into position, using its Mac cannon to shear a path into the Didact ship and granting John an entrance. John entered the ship, and in an attempt to stop him, the Didact caused the pathway to close down on the broadsword. John expertly maneuvered his fighter through the compressing hallway until it shrank to a narrow strip of white light, making the broadsword crash. He stepped away from the destroyed hull of his broadsword, somehow seemingly unscathed. Cortana queried John as to what his next move was. He procured the nuclear warhead and magnetically locked it to his armor, designating it as Plan B. From there, he fought his way through waves of Promethean resistance leading to the Didact. Eventually, the duo reached the central control area of the Composer. Then, Chief used a gravity lift to thrust himself across a void, reaching the lower floors of the control center. John accessed a terminal to try to allow Cortana to deactivate the shield the Didact deployed to protect the Composer. Cortana told him to insert her into a few terminals around the Composer so that she may deactivate the shielding around it. After fighting his way to the first generator, Cortana revealed that she was going to do something that he was not going to like. Her holographic form tore into multiple copies as she ejected her rampant personality spikes into the system, in order to overwhelm and disable the shielding under the stress of the sheer amount of multiplying rampant copies. Repeating this process, John moved to engage the Didact, who declared that John had failed, firing the Composer onto Earth and composing the population of New Phoenix. John went to retrieve Cortana, but the Didact disintegrated the terminal, launching a desperate John backwards. John proceeded through more waves of Promethean nights, whilst Cortana sent a message of text to his HUD to show that she had survived within the system of Mantle's approach. He began to hear multiple strange voices from the rampant personality spikes of Cortana proclaiming their intent always to take care of him. Locating a gravity lift, the Spartan was elevated to a high bridge directly connecting to the Composer. He caught sight of the Didact within the orange aura above the Composer, but his enemy quickly vanished, sensing his presence. Vocally challenging John, the Forerunner claimed that the man had persisted too long, offering him the opportunity to have his resolution. John turned with a jolt to notice the Didact behind him and attempted to engage him before being thrown back by his Forerunner enemy, having the warhead knocked away from him and sliding across the light bridge, and his battle rifle pushed into the abyss below. Regaining his footing, John became torn between his options of charging the Didact or retrieving the warhead. He ran for the warhead, but was stopped by the Didact, who lifted and held him over the slipspace portal that was powering the Composer, claiming John was misguided and that humanity's imprisonment in the Composer would be a kindness. The Didact began to close his fist, exerting a crushing force on John and causing him to groan in what would be extreme pain even for a Spartan 2. Before he could drop John into the abyss, the Didact was surrounded by Cortana's rampant personality spikes who emerged from the light bridge. After a short confrontation with the Didact, Cortana attacked the Didact and bound him by the arms to the bridge by using her hardlight forms. John was released and crashed chest first onto the edge of the light bridge, barely able to grab onto the ledge with a swirling orange abyss beneath him. He climbed up the bridge and swiftly charged the Didact, plunging a pulse grenade into his armor. The Didact, however, broke free from Cortana's bonds and pushed him away, sending him sliding across the bridge. Freeing his other arm, the Didact began to slowly lift John into the air, with the Spartan exerting sounds of desperation and pain, preparing for an almost imminent demise. The grenade detonated, causing the Didact to lose focus, becoming seriously injured, and dropped John, stumbling off the bridge into the slipspace rupture below. Out of time, John painfully crawled towards the warhead, frequently crashing onto the light bridge. He prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. Taking one final look up at Earth, John yelled in defiance to his enemy and smashed his hand on the tip of the warhead, detonating the nuclear weapon. John awakened in a strange area surrounded by hard light. He called Cortana's name. John received no reply and began to look around when a blue light drew his attention. A now human-sized Cortana stepped out of a coding circle around them and slowly approached him. John asked the AI how to leave, but Cortana said she wouldn't be coming with him this time. Stubbornly refusing to believe this, the Spartan ordered that they go together, and with his voice quivering told her, "I'm not leaving you here." Cortana sadly said his name before resting her hand on his armor for the first and last time. She sighed and emotionally revealed that she had been waiting to be able to touch him. The chief reminded Cortana that it was his job to protect her. However, she told him that it was their job to look after each other, and that they had done so. After briefly touching John, she then began to walk away. He begged her to wait. Disappearing into the data circle and leaving behind a devastated John, Cortana was gone. The hard light aura around him flickered and faded, and the debris of Mantle's approach fell around him. Pelican 9-6er came across John drifting in space and rescued him, taking him to the Infinity where he was greeted by its crew. A brief conversation with Lasky on the observation deck of the Infinity showed the now lonely soldier that he felt soldiers and people were two different things, and Lasky informed him that they were not. Suddenly, John came to a realization about himself. Being brought up as a killing machine had distanced himself from being a human, and he saw now that he had distanced himself from almost every other person he had ever known. He recalled what Cortana had asked him earlier about who of the duo was the real machine, and finally he found himself an answer. It was him. John was next seen entering the Spartan 4 training deck aboard the UNSC Infinity, surprising most of the trainees there. He proceeded to an armor removal station where a team of scientists removed his armor, whilst the other Spartan 4s and personnel looked on in respect and admiration. On July 25, 2557, John was debriefed before HICOM on his clashes with the Didact and his encounter with the Librarian. As the Didact's death was not confirmed, General Hogan decided to cover up the New Phoenix attack to have been perpetrated by Jul and Dama's Covenant. When the debriefing concluded, Lord Hood spoke with John, apologizing for the lack of professionalism during the debriefing. He then requested the chief's help in advising a team. He then showed John audio logs from a science team on Installation 03 escorted by Spartan Team Black, attacked by creatures John believed were Prometheans. This compelled John to request to join the team at Installation 03. Despite Hood's reservations that he'd take some time to rest, John firmly stated that the Prometheans should be confined to Requiem, and that it's best that he see them if they're running wild. John soon joins Blue Team, composed of his old friends Frederick 104, Kelly 087, and Linda 058, who were surprised to see him. After arriving at Installation 03 on July 26, the Spartans came to Black Team's last known coordinates and find a Promethean crawler footprint in the ground. Then they found the science camp, finding all the scientists and Team Black deceased. John then suspected that something more powerful than crawlers did this. Subsequently, they were ambushed by Promethean knights, but they eliminated them with ease. The Spartans then retraced the crawler tracks back to the hole where the Composer was uncovered. Then they enter a tunnel and find the Composer's abyss. Shortly after the Didact's defeat and the destruction of the Composer's abyss, John was ordered by Lord Hood to have a break from military operations with Blue Team. Instead of taking the orders, John led Blue Team on countless military operations when needed, drawing speculation of his mental state from Oni officials. At some point in 2558, Richard Sabiko, the Outer Colonies ambassador, had finally scheduled a long-awaited peace talk between human and alien delegates. Just as the peace talks were coming to a close, John apparently attacked the embassy where the event was being held and killed 19 human security guards. The alien delegates were escorted away by John to safety. John also abducted Sabiko, whose dead body was found in a nearby field the next day. It is later revealed that Blue Team and the Chief had learned of a plot against Sabiko, prompting their arrival at the delegation. The Master Chief then escorted the Sangheili delegates to safety along with the mortally wounded Richard Sabiko. The Chief killed 9 Sapien Sunrise infiltrators, but 10 of Sabiko's security detail were killed, along with 3 Sangheili guards. By the time the investigators realized that the attack was the work of the Sapien Sunrise, a leak had revealed false information regarding the events to the UEG public, causing outcry against the Master Chief and the Spartan 2 program in general. One of the last missions John would participate in for the UNSC is the raid of the UNSC Argent Moon. Jul 'Mdama's Dama's Covenant had taken the Argent Moon, and Blue Team was dispatched to retake the ship. Although fighting the Covenant wasn't abnormal, John's own team had been running on continuous missions, and there had been genuine concern amongst the Spartans about him. However, John insisted he was okay and led the team into the Argent Moon. It was while fighting a hunter that John got separated from his team, falling into the lower decks of the ship. During that time, he had a vision of Cortana within a cave and saw Cortana. The AI talked about reclamation starting soon in the planet Meridian. When John came to his senses, Blue Team regrouped with him to retake the ship. Unfortunately, more Covenant forces had arrived, and John decided to scuttle the ship. It was between this time that Fire Team Osiris defeated Jul 'Mdama, recovered Dr. Halsey, and returned to Infinity. Halsey was already aware of Cortana's movements and wanted John back, as she felt he was not mentally or emotionally capable of handling Cortana. Blue Team set the ship's reactor core to a time-controlled detonation and reported to the Infinity that he intended to head to Meridian to investigate a lead about Cortana. To everyone's surprise, Infinity replied that another team would handle the matter and wanted Blue Team to return. Finding the whole matter suspicious, John disobeyed his return order and decided to proceed to Meridian. John planned to do this himself without getting the rest of his team involved, but their loyalties to John motivated the rest of Blue Team to join him. The team boarded a Winter-class prowler and left as Argent Moon exploded. The ship cloaked and headed to Meridian. Sometime later, John had gone missing and was considered to have gone AWOL. As a result of John's disappearance, Oni deployed Fire Team Osiris to hunt the Spartan down. On October 27, 2558, the UNSC publicly declared John dead. Unofficially, however, he was alive, and Fire Team Osiris was tasked with hunting him down. Eventually, John and Blue Team came to the Forerunner world of Genesis, with Osiris in close pursuit, and after fighting armies of Promethean forces, mostly Nisan soldiers, and eventually the Warden Eternal, found Cortana. However, during John's attack on Mantle's approach, Cortana linked into the Domain, a precursor-made network that the Forerunners claimed after the Forerunner-Precursor War, and activated several Forerunner war machines and enforcement drones known as Guardians and deployed them across the galaxy. John attempted to talk her out of it, but was imprisoned in a cryptum with the rest of Blue Team. Osiris, realizing that Cortana was a bigger concern than their previous mission, rescued Blue Team and escaped Genesis, eventually fleeing to the elite homeworld of Sanghelios under the Arbiter's protection. We currently have no information on the events that happened between this and the arrival of John on Installation 07, Zeta Halo. Halo Infinite will hopefully answer this question and expand more on John and Cortana's story. This concludes our look into the Master Chief's history. Next week, we'll take a look into the creation of Cortana by visiting Dr. Halsey's past. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and also go to Original Human Geek for our group content and subscribe to that as well. Check out our Discord server, my Twitch channel, and my Twitter, link below in the description, and leave a comment on which characters you think I should cover in future videos. Again, thanks everybody so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is the Mana Gamer, signing off. Bye-bye.